Yeah.
MDC, look, dog.
Hold up. Right at the gate.
So what I'm trying to say, I'm going to prison with that same mentality. I'm good. The day that I'm supposed to die or something bad supposed to happen, God already got it written. So like, I'm not walking with no fear. When you walk with the Almighty, you walk confidently.
On April 3rd, 2026, Daniel Hernandez stepped out of the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, clutching a SpongeBob doll signed by Nicolas Maduro and rocking a chain worth around $2 million. The moment he touched the streets, people started talking crazy, saying he might not last long out here. In this video, we're breaking down everything that went down behind those walls, plus what really happened with his release. April 3rd, 2026. The doors at MDC Brooklyn swing open and out walks Tekashi 6ix9ine. He just finished 90 days, 3 months after stacking up multiple supervised release violations. We're talking 2 failed drug tests for methamphetamine, a random trip to Las Vegas he wasn't cleared for, pulling up an hour late to court, plus that March 2025 raid at his Florida spot where authorities found cocaine and MDMA.
On January 23rd, 2019, you originally pled not guilty, but on January 23rd, 2019, you changed your plea to guilty on all 9 charges against you, admitting to being a member of the 9 Trey Gangsters.
Yep.
And it didn't stop there. There was also that August 2025 mall situation where he went after a man who called him a snitch right to his face. He turned himself in on January 6th, 2026 during a live stream with streamer Adam Ross, making the whole thing public from the jump. Then suddenly, April 3rd, he's back out, even rumored to be released a day early. Right away, he's posting like nothing happened, celebrating heavy, showing off what people close to him say is a $2.2 million custom chain, moving like those 90 days were just a quick timeout. No chaos, no one stepping up to him, no drama in sight. Nobody made a move. And that's what makes this wild, because this isn't the first time people said he wouldn't make it out untouched. And once again, they were wrong. To really understand how 6ix9ine made it to April 2026 still standing, you have to rewind way back to the beginning, and it's not where most people think it starts. This story really kicks off in 2017, deep in Brooklyn, where a rapper nobody in New York was checking for suddenly flipped the whole scene upside down with one video. Daniel Hernandez came. Up in Bushwick, raised between cultures, his father Puerto Rican, his mother Mexican, moving through school, church, and a neighborhood where street life wasn't optional. It was just part of everyday reality.
What's your definition of a snitch? Let's start there.
A snitch is somebody, I feel like a snitch would do anything to get out of a situation. You know what I'm trying to say? Like a snitch will get faced with something and would just give up their mother, their brother, everybody.
By his teenage years, things were already shifting fast. He dropped out of school, started selling weed just to get by, and began messing around with music on the side. He was working at a bodega, barely making anything, no industry ties, no big cosigns, nothing lined up for him. But one thing he did have? The internet. And in 2017, that was all it took. He posted a photo that people couldn't ignore. Rainbow-colored hair, grills shining, tattoos all over his face, especially that bold 69, and a look that basically challenged anyone watching to say something about it. That picture spread like wildfire, turning him into a full-blown meme overnight. Then November hit, and everything changed. He dropped Gummo, produced by Pierre Bourne, filmed right in. Brooklyn with members of the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods right there in the video. The track exploded, climbing all the way to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and going platinum by March 2018. By February 2018, his debut mixtape, Day 69, landed at number 4 on the Billboard 200. Think about that, just months earlier, he was behind a bodega counter, and now he's sitting in the top 5 charts. That rise wasn't normal. It was fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. But here's where it gets serious. The people in those videos weren't just for show. By late 2017, Hernandez had real ties with the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods, connected through his manager, Keefano Shoddy Jordan. He later broke this whole setup down in court, under oath, with no filter.
And then this happened on top of it, that kind of put like the cherry on top.
So when 6ix9ine was on Del's project, Del's would FaceTime me and let me talk to 6ix9ine. And 6ix9ine was explaining these situations to me.
According to him, the deal was simple. He got street credibility, protection, and a heavy presence in his videos while they got the money. He was funding moves, putting up cash, even helping finance serious operations, including weapons and a heroin deal out in Bushwick. He was their main source of income, and they were his connection to the streets. It wasn't loyalty, it was business, but that business came crashing down on November 18th, 2018. Federal agents from the ATF, NYPD, and Homeland Security moved in and arrested Hernandez along with 5 others. The charges were serious: racketeering, conspiracy, firearms offenses, attempted murder, and narcotics trafficking. He was staring at a mandatory minimum of 47 years behind bars. At his first court appearance, he pleaded not guilty, but the situation was already closing in. But just 66 days later, on January 23, 2019, everything changed. He flipped his plea to guilty on all 9 counts, signed a cooperation agreement, and agreed to testify against the same people he once called his brothers in public.
I don't know what could happen when I exit that mall, so I don't regret nothing because I would do it again.
That moment right there shifted everything, and people have been talking about it ever since. Then came sentencing on December 18th, 2019. Instead of decades, he got 2 years with credit for the 13 months he had already served in pretrial detention, plus 5 years of supervised release and community service. By April 2020, he was released to home confinement due to COVID-19 concerns and documented asthma. The streets were already saying he wouldn't last, but he came right back, jumping on Instagram Live on May 8th, 2020, his birthday, pulling in over 2 million viewers at the same time. No hiding, no silence, just straight back into the spotlight like nothing slowed him down. He dropped Gooba, and it exploded instantly. Over 43 million views in just 24 hours, breaking YouTube records for a hip-hop debut.
Like, it's like, we brought this nigga to the hood. First of all,
No, please don't.
Please don't. Nobody make a comment.
And the wild part? He didn't lay low at all. He didn't leave the country, didn't disappear, didn't step into witness protection. He stayed right in the spotlight like nothing could touch him. At the same time, Los Angeles had a program going during COVID where people could report businesses breaking stay-at-home orders and actually get paid for it. The whole situation had people talking, and 6ix9ine jumped right in. He commented on the Shade Room's post about it, then took it even further in a way only he would. He switched his profile picture to a cartoon version of himself sitting in a rat trap, casually eating cheese. He leaned all the way into the image people were already putting on him, and made sure everyone saw it loud and clear. Then came October 2024. He surrendered again over supervised release violations, including 2 positive methamphetamine tests and an unauthorized trip to Las Vegas. He served 45 days, came back out, and nothing happened. No incidents, no confrontations, nothing. Fast forward to January 2026, he turned himself in again, this time tied to the mall incident and more violations. He did 90 days, walked out, and once again, nothing happened. Vlad TV even asked him straight up before that surrender if being labeled a cooperator changed how people treated him on the inside. But heading into that 90-day stretch, he wasn't tense or worried.
Really give him a 5. He outside, like he's chilling regular. You feel me? Like this is regular. So why don't act like I did something wrong now?
He moved calm, almost like it was routine at that point. That kind of energy only comes from someone who's been through it before and keeps walking out the same way every single time. He did the full 90 days and walked out on April 3rd, 2026, untouched. Nobody stepped to him, nobody tested him, nothing happened. And that's where the real question comes in. Not what happened, but why it didn't happen. Because if you go by everything the streets claim to stand on, something should have gone down. So to really understand why it didn't, you have to look deeper, way deeper, into what he actually did in that courtroom. What 6ix9ine gave the federal government wasn't something you can sum up in a headline or turn into a quick meme. This wasn't just cooperating in the basic sense. This was detailed, inside-level exposure of an entire organization, broken down piece by someone who was right in the middle of it and financially backing it. The level of detail was so precise that even prosecutors described it as extraordinary in official filings. The case, United States versus Jones et al., focused on the federal racketeering prosecution of the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods in the Southern District of New York. Back on November 18, 2018, federal agents from the ATF, NYPD, and Homeland Security investigations carried out a coordinated takedown, arresting Hernandez along with 5 others. The indictment, unsealed the very next day, laid out serious charges: racketeering, conspiracy, firearms offenses, attempted murder, and narcotics trafficking. This wasn't a small situation. It was a full-scale federal case, and 6ix9ine was right at the center of it all.
Exactly.
So it's like after that, I'm shutting up, bro. I'm not even gonna talk too much, you heard? That's it.
The level of exposure Hernandez was facing was serious, life-changing serious. The mandatory minimums tied just to the firearms charges alone stacked up into decades, and when you added everything together, he was looking at the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. At his first court appearance, he pleaded not guilty, but that didn't last long. By January 23, 2019, just 66 days after getting arrested, he flipped his plea to guilty on all 9 counts, and that's where everything took a sharp turn. Because what came with that plea wasn't small at all, it was a cooperation agreement on a whole different level. 6ix9ine didn't just admit he was involved, he went deep. He broke down the 9-tray structure from the inside, laying out who held which rank, how leadership worked, and how decisions were made. He explained the difference between members operating on the streets and those incarcerated but still calling shots from behind bars. He described how authority flowed, how actions were approved, and how internal systems like dues and meetings were handled. He identified Jamel Mel Murda Jones as the street-level leader and placed his own manager, Kifano Shotty Jordan, as Big Homie with a high-ranking position. He mapped out roles, responsibilities, and connections in a way that gave authorities a clear picture they had been trying to build for years. And he didn't stop there. Over 3 days of testimony in September 2019, he went even further under oath, speaking on specific incidents tied to his own actions. He admitted to paying large sums of money, reportedly between $10,000 and $20,000, in connection with a shooting incident targeting Chief Keef outside the W Hotel in Times Square back in June 2018, describing it as a move to build status. He also admitted involvement in a robbery on West 40th Street in Manhattan, placing himself directly in situations that carried serious legal weight. This wasn't surface-level talking, this was detailed, first-hand information that hit every layer of the case.
Yo, let's pull up to the
If I want to.
Okay.
That's how real it is. I'm telling y'all, like, if I want to, whatever I want to do, I could do.
In April 2018, he admitted to agreeing to sell a kilogram of heroin in Bushwick. He also confirmed details tied to the April 2018 Barclays Center shooting, which was connected to his public feud with Casanova at the time. And as he testified, he didn't hold back. He broke down, in very detailed terms, how violence inside that circle was actually approved, coordinated, and carried out. He described his own involvement with a level of blunt honesty that shocked people watching the case unfold. He explained that he originally joined the gang for what it gave him: music leverage, attention, and industry momentum. And for a while, that arrangement worked both ways in his eyes. But then he drew a line, one he kept repeating every time he was questioned. He separated what he called cooperating from what he described as snitching on innocent people, claiming that the individuals he spoke about had previously robbed him at gunpoint, taken money from him, slept with the mother of his child, and even discussed harming him on federal wiretaps. Whether that justification holds up or not, it became the framework he leaned on every time the topic came up, and the impact of everything he said showed up directly in court outcomes. The people he testified against faced heavy sentences. Anthony Harv Ellison, the man who was involved in kidnapping and assaulting Hernandez in July 2018, forcing him into a stolen vehicle at gunpoint and recording the attack, was later convicted and sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. Alger-Maya Nuke Mack was also convicted on racketeering and narcotics charges, receiving roughly 17 years. Other members, including Mel Murda Ish, Kuda B, and others, all took guilty pleas that led to multi-year sentences. And Kifano Shotty Jordan, his former manager and one of his closest associates, the same person who had been in his home and on tour with him, and whose messages became key evidence, received a 15-year federal sentence. When Vlad TV asked 6ix9ine how it felt knowing that Kifano Shotty Jordan had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, his response came fast. No pause, no hesitation. There wasn't any visible conflict or emotional breakdown in the way he answered. Instead, it came across like someone who had already built a mental system to justify everything he had done and was fully standing inside it, not stepping back from it. Vlad TV didn't stop there either. They pushed into the bigger question hanging over the entire cultural moment, the same question critics had been arguing about for years. And the backlash from the hip-hop world had already been massive, almost immediate.
You know what it's like. You know it. How easy it is to get caught up in some shit. When they said you're a snitch, you should have left at him and went on about your way. Let's say you kill him, you still gonna be called a snitch. You still gonna be called it.
Snoop Dogg posted memes, Meek Mill publicly called him out, and names like Future, 50 Cent, Boozy Badazz, Boaz, and Vince Staples all weighed in across interviews and social media. Diss tracks started dropping, radio support cooled off, and venues that once booked him began distancing themselves. Across podcasts, Instagram pages, and YouTube commentary channels, the message was the same. People were convinced his time outside wouldn't last long, and that the streets would eventually handle what the courts did not. Then in 2023, things turned physical. 3 men confronted and attacked 6ix9ine inside the sauna of an LA fitness gym in Palm Beach County, Florida. He was hospitalized afterward, and the suspects were quickly arrested. The incident was serious enough to dominate headlines and fuel the narrative people had been predicting for years. But even after that, he recovered, and instead of disappearing, he filed a lawsuit against the gym. He kept pushing the line and kept trolling, refusing to fully step back from the spotlight. In August 2025, a man at a South Florida mall confronted him face-to-face, calling him a snitch directly to his face. 6ix9ine responded by attacking him, an action that violated the terms of his supervised release and set off the legal chain reaction that ultimately led to his January 2026 surrender and 90-day sentence. And when Vlad TV asked him about it afterward, there was no regret in his response at all. Every single one of these moments, the gym attack, the mall confrontation, the disses online, the club incidents, was real. But they didn't all happen in one straight line right after his release. They were spread out across years, separated by long stretches where nothing happened at all. And that's what makes it stand out, because not a single one of these incidents produced the kind of final, street-enforced consequence people kept predicting. That brings up the question that's been sitting underneath everything this whole time, the one nobody in music commentary ever fully answered. Why didn't it happen? Why wasn't 6ix9ine handled the way so many said he would be? Not at his 2020 federal prison release, not after his 2024 supervised release violation, and not even when he walked out of MDC Brooklyn on April 3rd, 2026. That reality cuts into one of reality. Hip-hop's most repeated ideas. The belief that the streets operate like an automatic justice system where cooperation guarantees consequences and fame or money can't stop the outcome. Instead, what actually played out is more complicated. The reactions, the incidents, the court outcomes, and the gaps between them all tell a story that doesn't fit neatly into that myth. And that complexity is exactly what makes this case continue to be talked about.
Kodak Black took $1 million to do a song with 6ix9ine. Everybody else mad because 6ix9ine ain't coming in with that same outfit.
Back in 2020, while commentators and artists were loudly saying 6ix9ine was done for, claiming he would never be able to move safely in public again, something happened that cracked that entire narrative wide open. A group of men from a Brooklyn neighborhood made a very different choice. They brought him into their area and even allowed him to shoot a music video inside their projects. That decision alone went against everything people online had been insisting would happen. When the footage later surfaced, recorded alongside, podcast host Hassan Campbell, who was involved in documenting the moment, one of the men who helped set it up, began explaining why they did it. And what he said cut straight through years of loud cultural debate and assumptions with one blunt point. The reaction in the room was immediate pushback. People weren't agreeing with him at first, and the tension was obvious. But he didn't back off. He kept talking, building out his reasoning step by step. And what he ended up describing wasn't a defense of 6ix9ine or a defense of cooperating with law enforcement. It was something more uncomfortable for people to hear. It was a defense of consistency in how people judge others. He pointed to examples from his own neighborhood. Older figures who were widely known to have cooperated with law enforcement years ago, even decades back. Yet those same individuals were still around, still acknowledged, still greeted, still given a kind of informal acceptance in daily life. According to him, these were people who remained in the community because they had value, connections, or resources that made it easier for others to overlook their past actions, even when those actions were widely known. His argument wasn't framed as moral judgment at all. It was purely observational, almost like he was describing a system he'd watched operate for years. The so-called code that was supposed to guarantee consequences for cooperation already had cracks all through it, big ones. And those cracks didn't run randomly. They followed money, time, and relationships, not just actions. The outrage toward 6ix9ine was loud, constant, and stretched across the culture for years. But at the same time, people in the same environments were making completely different allowances for others who had done similar things. According to him, the principle was the same underneath it all. The rules bent when someone had enough influence, value, or standing. He called it directly, selective politicking.
I knew what I was signing up for. I knew everything. I knew the guys I was rolling with, right? What I thought I knew, right?
A situation where the same action produces completely different outcomes depending on who you are, what you represent, and how much leverage you carry financially or socially. In that framework, an older figure in a neighborhood who cooperated years ago but stayed locally connected could be tolerated, even accepted in day-to-day life. But a highly visible, rainbow-haired internet millionaire who testified in a federal case? That triggered a completely different level of reaction. In his view, the variable was never just the act itself, it was visibility. And underneath visibility, he argued, was always the money factor. That bag factor showed up everywhere in 6ix9ine's post-prison reality. Even the people who brought him into their neighborhood to shoot a video weren't doing it out of solidarity or approval of informants. They were doing it because it brought attention. Association with him, controversial or not, translated into views, clout, and in some cases, direct payment. And when someone asked them straight up if there was zero money involved, would they still have let him film there? One of the men answered immediately, without hesitation, in a way that revealed exactly what was driving the decision. The answer claimed autonomy, like it was purely personal choice, like nobody was influenced by anything outside themselves. But the reality sitting underneath it was different. The entire conversation had already been saturated with one fact nobody could escape. 6ix9ine's name had massive commercial value, and nobody there was pretending they didn't know it. Some people leaned into it directly. Kodak Black, for example, reportedly took $1 million to do a track with him. Others who publicly said he was untouchable were still willing to take meetings behind the scenes. And those who refused weren't always doing it from some strict moral stance either. Many, like Lil Woody pointed out, were more concerned about how they would be perceived by everyone else if they were seen working with him. Lil Woody had actually spoken directly with 6ix9ine during the period when public backlash was at its peak. And his message wasn't hype or encouragement, it was blunt clarity. He told him that the label placed on him was permanent, and no amount of aggression, image, or street behavior could erase it. In that framing, the idea that retaliation could fix or restore honor didn't really hold up anymore. The entire logic behind violent consequence as a way to reset reputation was already breaking down. Because there was no violent action available to 6ix9ine that could erase the court record.
God used me going to jail to clean my whole circle. God cut my grass so I could see the snakes in it.
And on the flip side, there was no violent action the streets could take that would erase what was already documented in federal proceedings. His cooperation wasn't hidden, it was part of the official record. It was referenced in federal court filings, reported by major outlets like The New York Times, included in the indictment, detailed in the 5K 1.1 motion, and summarized across legal transcripts and reporting breakdowns. Once it entered that system, it became permanent in a way street-level enforcement simply couldn't undo or overwrite. 6ix9ine understood this reality earlier than most of his critics ever did, and his reaction to it wasn't remorse at all. It was absorption, then reframing, and eventually even weaponization. He laid out his entire cooperation timeline in the Angie Martinez interview, breaking everything down in a way that stripped away all the cultural noise and turned it into a straight sequence of events. He pointed to a kidnapping in July 2018, a federal wiretap that allegedly confirmed his manager was involved with the mother of his child, and even a meeting with the FBI back in November 2017 where he says he expressed willingness to cooperate before he was formally arrested. By the time he reached the cooperation stage, he described the situation as already collapsed beyond repair. In his version, the betrayal wasn't something he discovered late, it was already fully documented in his mind. So, the decision wasn't framed as choosing between loyalty and survival, it was framed as realizing the loyalty he believed in had already been broken. The condition he believed in, mutual loyalty, hadn't been met. In his eyes, the people around him weren't loyal in the first place. And after laying out every date, every incident, and every moment in order during the interview, he arrived at a conclusion he clearly still carried with him. Whether that framing is belief, justification, performance, or some mix of all three, it created something the streets couldn't really counter.
I've been a Paru 33 years, right?
You want to switch for me?
Huh? So I've seen it. I seen the selective politicking. I see that got all the money who told on everybody, pull up and everybody looked the other way.
A person who didn't internalize shame for actions he didn't agree were unjustified in the first place. That made him hard to break in the way people expected, because shame requires accepting the premise that you did, something you need to be punished for in that moral framework. And in that Brooklyn video, the man speaking, someone who had lived through over 3 decades watching how those codes were applied unevenly in real time, recognized that he had seen this kind of contradiction before playing out in different forms. For 33 years, he had watched this same pattern repeat across decades. The man with money who cooperated got overlooked, while the man without money who cooperated got handled. That contrast stuck with him because it showed him something deeper than any street slogan ever could. In his view, enforcement was never truly about the act itself. It was about the power, influence, and value attached to the person who did it. And that pattern didn't disappear when 6ix9ine walked out of MDC Brooklyn on April 3rd, 2026, wearing a $2.2 million chain and holding a SpongeBob doll. The livestream of his surrender with Aiden Ross had already pushed the moment into full media. Circulation and the content machine never slowed down. When he stepped out, there was no crowd waiting, no confrontation, no retaliation in the days that followed. Even the same people who once brought him into neighborhoods to shoot videos without security showed, in their own actions, how selective everything had become. What the 33-year veteran was pointing out was simple but uncomfortable. The streets didn't smoke him because the same selective politicking he had observed for decades was still in play. The rules were never applied evenly, and they never had been. In this economy built on attention, everything shifted. The bag protected him, the trolling amplified him, and his repeated refusal to express regret in a way people demanded only strengthened his position in the public space. Even his most controversial stance, saying clearly that he did what he did and did not regret it, became part of the shield around him. And for those who received sentences through his cooperation, those outcomes were already locked in through the legal system. Whether people agreed or not, that structure stood on its own. At the end of it all, the conclusion was uncomfortable but consistent with everything described so far. A man who refuses to accept the moral verdict placed on him cannot be fully sentenced by it in the way people expect. That's where this story lands, for now. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment below what you think about the situation and whether you believe the streets ever truly handled him.